If you don't know about flyer deals on Instacart, this message is for you. Flyer deals are like strolling through your favorite store looking for deals, but you're scrolling your phone, and maybe you're in bed. Because getting delivery doesn't mean you have to miss deals like you'd get at the store, like the one creamer that doesn't make your stomach hurt, or the pasta sauce you can't not buy when it's on sale. So download the Instacart app, shop flyers, and never miss a deal on one of your favorites. Plus, get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes.
Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. I'm your host, guiding you through cases that have moved through the courts and reached a conclusion, but left the public divided. These aren't your typical cut and dried cases. These are the ones where the facts may be clear, but the truth, well, that's another story. Now, imagine this. You are a fan of a glamorous reality TV show where drama and luxury collide. The cast flaunts designer wardrobes, expensive cars, and lavish lifestyles. But one day, one of these stars is arrested, and not for a petty crime, for orchestrating a massive telemarketing scam that preyed on vulnerable elderly victims. Well, that's exactly what happened to Jen Shah, a breakout star of the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Known for her fiery personality and opulent spending habits, Jen became a household name, someone audiences loved, or loved to hate. But then in March of 21, she's arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering in connection with a nationwide telemarketing scheme. The scheme targeted elderly individuals, tricking them into buying fraudulent services. Shah, along with her co-defendant, Stuart Smith, was accused of playing a central role in the operation, profiting from the financial ruin of countless victims. Well, in January of 23, she was sentenced to 6.5 years in federal prison after pleading guilty. This case sparked outrage and divided opinions. Was Jen Shah always this person, hiding behind the glitz of reality TV? Or did fame and pressure push her into moral collapse? As we explore her story, we are going to ask, who is the real Jen Shah? Does her punishment fit the crime? And what happened here? Now, before Jen Shah became a household name, she was simply Jen from Salt Lake City. Born into a large Tongan and Hawaiian family, Jen often spoke about the values instilled in her by her parents. The hard work, the family loyalty, the resilience. She attended the University of Utah, where she studied political science and later married Shah, a football coach. This all sounds wonderful, and together they raised 2 sons and presented the image of a tight-knit, successful family. But beneath the surface, there were signs of struggle. Jen often alluded to feelings of inadequacy, being one of the few Polynesian women in predominantly white spaces. She worked in marketing and telemarketing, industries notorious for their blurred ethical lines. But still, by the time she joined the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, she seemed to have it all: wealth and confidence, and a larger-than-life personality. So how does someone with these roots and outward success end up orchestrating a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme? Was it a hunger for more? More money, more fame, more validation? Or was it simply the culmination of years spent in an industry where the lines between right and wrong often do blur? Her story makes us wonder, was she always this person, willing to cross the line for her own personal gain? Or did the pressure to uphold her public persona lead her to compromise her own values? These questions haunt this case, revealing not just a legal dilemma, but a deeply human one. What makes someone trade integrity for success? It's one thing to commit a crime in secret, hoping never to be caught. And it's another to do so while standing in the spotlight, flaunting your wealth and confidence for the world to see. It takes it to another level. Jen Shah didn't just participate in a massive fraud scheme. She did it while presenting herself as a symbol of luxury and success. So what happened here? How does someone justify actions that prey on the vulnerable while projecting an image of confidence and charm, all at the same time? For many, the answer lies in a mix of denial, rationalization, and the culture of reality TV. Now, on the show, Jen frequently boasted about her success, attributing her wealth to her marketing empire. The truth? Her business ventures included selling fake leads to telemarketers who then exploited elderly victims. That would have taken on a little bit of a different sound, wouldn't it? Experts often point to the concept of compartmentalization, the ability to separate unethical actions from one's self-image. In Jen's case, her public persona may have become so intertwined with her self-worth that she convinced herself it was all part of the game. After all, in her world, appearances meant everything. As long as she looked the part, she could ignore the moral consequences. But can the allure of fame and fortune truly justify exploiting others? Was this a calculated deception? Or did she believe her own lies? These questions challenge our understanding of how someone can present themselves with such confidence while living a double life, leaving us to wonder, did Jen Shah see herself as a criminal or just a savvy businesswoman caught up in a high-stakes game? For years, Jen Shah maintained the perfect illusion, a bold personality, a lavish lifestyle, and a business empire that seemed to fund it all. But behind the scenes, cracks in her facade were beginning to show. The unraveling began with federal investigations into telemarketing scams targeting elderly victims. Shah's name emerged as a key player, with allegations that she and her assistant, Stuart Smith, were at the center of the operation. According to prosecutors, Shah's role involved creating and selling lists of potential victims, people over 55 years old who were often vulnerable to fraudulent schemes. These lists were sold to telemarketers who convinced victims to invest in non-existent services, draining their savings. The turning point came in March of 21 when federal agents arrested Jen Shah while she was filming for The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Her dramatic arrest, captured on camera, shocked both fans and her castmates. Initially, Shah pleaded not guilty, maintaining her innocence and claiming she was a victim of false accusations. However, the mounting evidence, bank records, witness testimonies, and her own communications painted a damning picture. In July of 22, she changed her plea to guilty, admitting her role in the scheme. The plea deal spared her a longer sentence, but came at the cost of public humiliation. By January of 23, she was sentenced to 6.5 years in federal prison and ordered to pay millions in restitution. The fallout left many questions. Was Shah genuinely remorseful? Or was her plea deal a calculated move to reduce her sentence? And for her victims, many of whom lost their life savings, was her punishment enough? As the dust settled, the public remained divided. Was justice served? Or does this case represent a failure to truly hold the powerful accountable? To understand the Jen Shah case, we must start with the scheme itself, one that preyed on some of the most vulnerable members of society. According to court documents, the telemarketing fraud operation targeted older adults, many of whom were over 55 and lived on fixed incomes. The scam was both elaborate and ruthless. Victims were sold business services, quote unquote, that promised to help them start or improve online businesses. Now, in reality, these services were worthless. Shah and her co-conspirators obtained lists of potential victims, referred to as leads, which were categorized based on their likelihood to fall for the scam. Shah's role involved creating and selling these lists to telemarketers, knowing they would use them to exploit victims. The telemarketers pressured victims into paying thousands of dollars for services that didn't exist, and many were left in financial ruin, losing their life savings and in some cases even their homes. Prosecutors estimated that the scheme had operated for nearly a decade, defrauding victims of millions of dollars. What made this case even more shocking was the contrast between Shah's public persona and her actions. On television, she portrayed herself as a successful businesswoman and a devoted wife and mother. But behind the scenes, she profited from a scheme built on deception and cruelty. By the time federal agents began investigating, Shah's operation had left a trail of destruction. Victims were devastated, and law enforcement was determined to hold those responsible accountable. The scale of fraud, combined with Shah's public image, made this case one of the most talked about scandals in recent years. The investigation into Jen Shah's telemarketing scheme began years before her arrest. As federal authorities worked to unravel the web of fraud, it was part of a larger effort by the Department of Justice and Homeland Security to combat crimes targeting elderly victims, a group often overlooked but heavily impacted by scams like this one. Authorities traced the origins of the scheme to a network of telemarketing companies operating across several states. These companies were linked by shared lead lists, financial transactions, and a handful of key players. Shah and her assistant, Stuart Smith, were identified as central figures. Investigators obtained emails, text messages, and recorded calls that showed Shah not only knew about the scam but actively directed it. One of the key breaks in the case came from cooperating witnesses, former employees and associates who provided first-hand accounts of Shah's role. They described how she instructed them to mislead victims, to downplay refund requests, and to push additional services to extract more money. These were her instructions. Financial records also show Shah's company receiving payments from telemarketers involved in the scam, further tying her to the operation. By the time Shah was arrested in March of 21, federal agents had compiled a mountain of evidence. They intercepted her communications, tracked her financial transactions, and interviewed victims who had been left financially devastated. Her arrest, executed while she was filming The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, added an unexpected layer of drama to an already sensational case. The investigation highlighted the systemic nature of the fraud and the devastating impact it had on its victims. For prosecutors, it wasn't just about bringing Shah to justice. It was about sending a message that no one, not even a reality TV star, is above the law. Jen Shah's battle began immediately after her arrest in March of 21, facing charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. She pleaded not guilty at first. Her legal team portrayed her as a victim of misunderstanding and overreach, claiming she had no knowledge of these fraudulent activities. The court proceedings were nothing short of dramatic. Prosecutors alleged that Shah had been a key orchestrator in a decade-long scheme, profiting at the expense of elderly victims. They described her role as deliberate and calculated, presenting evidence of her involvement, including financial records and text messages that contradicted her public denials. Shah, however, maintained her innocence, even continuing to film for The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Her confidence and charisma were on full display during this time. But as the case progressed, the weight of the evidence became impossible to ignore. In July of 22, Shah shocked the public by changing her plea to guilty. she admitted in court to knowingly participating in the scheme, apologizing to her victims and acknowledging the harm she had caused. Her plea deal included an agreement to pay $9.5 million in restitution and forfeit $6.5 million in assets. When sentencing came in January of 23, Shah was handed a 6.5-year prison sentence. The courtroom was filled with emotional testimonies from victims and a tearful statement from Shah, who vowed to make an amends. But her sentence left many questioning whether justice had truly been served. For some, the time behind bars, the financial penalties, it seemed insufficient for the scale of damage caused. For others, her guilty plea and public downfall were punishment enough. As the legal chapter closed, the public debate only intensified. Was Jen Shah a remorseful participant caught in over her head, or a manipulative scammer who finally met her match? Jen Shah's conviction sent shockwaves, and not just through the world of the Real Housewives, but through her personal life as well. While much of the public focused on her opulent lifestyle and dramatic courtroom appearances, her family behind the scenes bore the brunt of the fallout, all away from the cameras. Sharif Shah, Jen's husband of nearly 3 decades, remained a pillar of support throughout her legal battle. As a respected football coach and father, Sharif faced the difficult task of protecting their 2 sons, Sharif Jr. and Omar, from the media storm surrounding their mother. Reports indicated that he worked tirelessly to shield his children from the public scrutiny and judgment, though neither he nor the boys spoke openly about the ordeal. The reality of their mother's actions undoubtedly placed immense strain on the family. Jen's younger son, Omar, still a teenager, had to deal with the stigma of having a parent convicted of a serious crime. Sharif Jr., a recent college graduate, was thrust into a position of maturity, supporting his family while processing his own emotions. Yet these challenges were conspicuously absent from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, where so many people came to know Jen Shah. While she continued to film during her legal troubles, the show focused on her denial and her fiery personality, rather than the toll it took on her loved ones. And this omission left viewers questioning how much of Jen's life was being hidden from public view, how much of what they were seeing was real. The financial consequences also impacted the family, though, with millions in restitution and forfeited assets. The lavish lifestyle showcased on TV came crashing down. Sharif reportedly took on additional responsibilities to manage the family's finances, further highlighting the burden placed on him. The Shah family's resilience remained largely private, but their story underscores the ripple effects of Jen's actions. Beyond the victims of her scheme, her family became collateral damage, forced to endure public judgment and rebuild their lives while the world watched. And this raises yet another question in all of this. When someone like Jen Shah commits a crime of this magnitude, is the punishment limited to the individual, or does it inevitably extend to their loved ones? The prosecution built a strong case against Jen Shah, presenting her as a key orchestrator in a scheme that defrauded elderly victims of millions of dollars. They argued that Shah's involvement was not peripheral. She was a central role in all of this, using her influence and resources to sustain the fraud for nearly a decade, keeping it going, keeping it operating. Prosecutors detailed how Shah and her co-conspirators worked together to identify and exploit vulnerable individuals. They provided evidence showing that Shah knowingly sold lead lists of potential victims, despite being aware that those on the lists would be pressured into purchasing fraudulent services. Emails and text messages revealed that she not only facilitated these transactions, but also coached her team on how to manipulate victims effectively. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was testimony from cooperating witnesses, former associates, who described Shah's direct involvement. They alleged that she played an active role in designing scripts used by the telemarketers to mislead victims, ensuring the operation remained profitable. The prosecution also highlighted the devastating impact of the scheme on those victims. Many elderly individuals losing their entire life savings. They were forced into bankruptcy or endured significant emotional distress. Victim impact statements read in court painted a grim picture of lives irreparably damaged by Shah's actions. To counter Shah's public denials, prosecutors emphasized her opulent lifestyle, arguing that the profits from the scam directly funded her lavish spending habits. They presented financial records showing a clear link between the fraudulent operation and Shah's personal accounts. For the prosecution, this case was not just about punishing Jen Shah. It was about setting an example. They sought a lengthy prison sentence and substantial financial penalties, arguing that anything less would fail to deter others from committing crimes like this. In their closing arguments, they posed a stark question to the court. Should someone who knowingly defrauded the most vulnerable be allowed to walk away with a slap on the wrist? Their message was clear. Jen Shah's actions demanded accountability, both for her victims and society at large. And so, Jen Shah's defense team faced an uphill battle here. The evidence against her was overwhelming, but they worked to humanize her and present her as a flawed individual who deserved compassion and leniency. One of their key arguments was that Jen Shah was not the mastermind the prosecutors made her out to be. They painted her as a minor player in a much larger operation, arguing she was caught up in a web of deception rather than orchestrating it herself. The defense highlighted her history of working in marketing and telemarketing, claiming she lacked the financial acumen to fully understand the implications of her actions. Her attorneys also leaned heavily on her personal circumstances, emphasizing her role as a mother and a wife. They described the impact her imprisonment would have on her two sons, arguing that a lengthy sentence would cause unnecessary harm to her family. Perhaps their most compelling strategy was to focus on Shah's willingness to take responsibility. After initially pleading not guilty, she changed her plea to guilty in July of 22, admitting her role in the scheme. And her defense team framed this as evidence of her remorse, citing her courtroom apology and promise to repay victims. In a bid to secure a lighter sentence, Shah's attorneys pointed to her charitable contributions and her community involvement, claiming she was capable of redemption. And they argued that she had already suffered significant consequences, including public humiliation, financial ruin, and the loss of her reputation. The defense closed their arguments by asking the court to balance justice with mercy. They posed a question of their own. Should Jen Shah's entire life be defined by this one mistake? Or does she deserve the opportunity to rebuild herself and make amends? It was a plea not just for leniency, but for understanding the complexities of human behavior. The prosecution was quick to counter the defense's portrayal of Jen Shah as a minor player and a remorseful participant. Their rebuttal painted a starkly different picture, one of calculated decisions, deliberate deception, and a lack of genuine accountability. First, they dismantled the claim that Jen Shah was unaware of the scope of the scheme. Prosecutors presented evidence showing her active involvement in nearly every stage of the operation. Emails, text messages, it all revealed that Jen not only knew about the fraudulent practices, but also directed others on how to execute them. These communications, they argued, showed a clear understanding of the harm being caused to victims. They also addressed Shah's change of plea. While they acknowledged her guilty plea, they questioned her motives. Was it a sign of genuine remorse, or was this a strategic move to get a lighter sentence? They pointed out that Shah's initial response to her arrest included public denials and accusations of unfair targeting, which undermined her claims of accountability at all. To challenge the defense's emphasis on Shah's family and community ties, prosecutors argued that these factors did not negate the harm she caused. They read emotional victim impact statements aloud in court, describing how individuals lost their life savings, they endured financial ruin, and suffered emotional trauma. The prosecution made it clear that these victims didn't have the same opportunity to rebuild their lives. Perhaps the most damning rebuttal came in the form of Shah's own public persona. The prosecution argued that her lavish lifestyle, broadcast on national television, was funded by the exploitation of her victims. They pointed to specific purchases, from designer clothing to luxury vacations, that were directly tied to the proceeds of the scheme. In their closing remarks, the prosecution reiterated their demand for a significant prison sentence and financial penalties, and they left the court with a final question. If someone like Jen Shah, with all her resources and privileges, isn't held fully accountable, what message does that send to others considering the same crimes? While the courtroom debates were fierce, the court of public opinion added another layer of complexity to this case. Jen Shah's defense team didn't just fight for leniency in the legal system. They also worked very hard to sway public perception. Jen Shah's legal team and publicists emphasized her remorse, highlighting her guilty plea as a step toward taking responsibility. They framed her actions as a grave mistake rather than a reflection of her character, leaning on narratives of redemption and second chances. Shah herself reinforced this message, issuing public apologies and expressing regret for her actions. However, for many, these gestures fell flat. Critics pointed out that Shah continued to film The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City throughout her legal battle, even using her legal troubles as a storyline. Her on-screen bravado and insistence on her innocence, right up until her guilty plea, contradicted her claims of remorse. Victims and advocates for elderly fraud survivors were particularly vocal, arguing that the punishment didn't fit the crime. How could 6.5 years in prison possibly account for the lifelong financial devastation inflicted on dozens of individuals? For someone with no savings or financial safety net, the damage was permanent. The comparison between Shah's relatively short sentence, really, and the enduring consequences for victims sparked outrage. The disparity also reignited broader issues and conversations. People were talking about justice and privilege. Was Shah's ability to hire high-powered attorneys and spin a narrative of redemption and privilege reserved only for the wealthy? And how did her fame influence both the legal proceedings and public perception? Despite these criticisms, there were still those who sympathized with Shah. Fans pointed to her cultural background and the challenges she faced as a Polynesian woman in predominantly white spaces. Others believed that the public scrutiny and loss of her reputation were punishments in their own right. As the case unfolded in the media, one question lingered. Was the narrative around Jen Shah being shaped by her wealth and fame, or did it reflect a genuine reckoning with her actions? In the end, her ability to influence public opinion became as much a part of the case as the legal arguments themselves. When Jen Shah's sentence was announced, the 6.5 years in federal prison, the reactions were as polarized as the case itself. For her victims and their advocates, the punishment felt woefully inadequate. These individuals had lost their life savings, their financial security, and in some cases, their independence. And many argued that no prison sentence could truly compensate for the harm caused. 6.5 years? It felt like a slap on the wrist. And critics pointed out the disparity between Shah's punishment and the consequences faced by her victims. For someone starting over with nothing at 55 or older, the financial and emotional toll of being scammed was life-altering. Meanwhile, Shah, with her resources and privilege, she'd have the opportunity to rebuild her life after serving her time. And this imbalance became a flashpoint for debates about fairness in the justice system. And on the other side, Shah supporters argued that her sentence, combined with the financial restitution and the public humiliation she faced, it was significant penalty. They pointed to her guilty plea as a step toward accountability, suggesting she deserved the chance to redeem herself. This dichotomy raised broader questions about how society measures justice. Is it enough to punish the perpetrator, or should the focus be on repairing the damage done to the victims? In Shah's case, the law focused on her culpability, but for many, justice remained elusive. The controversy also highlighted how fame and privilege can shape public perception. Would an ordinary person convicted of the same crime have received the same sentence or public attention? Or was Shah's punishment influenced by her status as a reality TV star? These questions left many feeling uneasy, feeling the ongoing debate about whether the system truly serves justice or simply rewards those who can navigate it most effectively. Jen Shah's case became a media spectacle from the moment of her arrest. The combination of a high-profile reality TV star and a federal fraud investigation was irresistible to the public. This happened while she was on TV, her arrest, and the media coverage only amplified the controversy surrounding her sentence. On one hand, Shah's actions were portrayed as the epitome of greed and entitlement. News outlets emphasized the stark contrast between her lavish lifestyle and the financial devastation she caused her victims. Headlines focused on her designer wardrobe, her extravagant parties, and the luxury trips she flaunted on the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. To many, this image of excess made her crimes even more egregious, reinforcing the idea that she exploited the vulnerable to fund her own indulgence. But on the other hand, and you might be surprised here if you are not really familiar with who this is, but Shah's charisma and her larger-than-life personality on TV and everywhere else, it won her a surprising number of supporters. People felt for her. Her fans argued she was being unfairly targeted. They had fallen in love with her. They were supporting her. They claimed the media's portrayal was biased against her because of her boldness and her background. Some even framed her as a victim of a system that often scapegoats women of color in high-profile cases. There was a lot going on here, and a lot of accusations. The media's role in shaping public perception extended beyond the facts of this case, as it does so much of the time. Reality TV thrives on drama, and Shah's legal troubles were seamlessly integrated into the Real Housewives storyline. Her arrest became must-watch TV, and if you haven't seen it, go find it, with cast members speculating about her guilt and viewers dissecting every moment. This blurred the line between entertainment and real-life justice, leaving many questioning whether her punishment was influenced by her status as a reality TV villain. As the story played out in the public eye, it raised deeper questions about how fame intersects with accountability. Did her celebrity status make her an easy target for criticism, or did it shield her from harsher consequences? And for her victims, many of whom likely never watched an episode of The Real Housewives, did the media frenzy add insult to injury by reducing their suffering to a subplot in a reality TV drama where their money was being spent all over the place? This tension between media narrative and legal reality remains one of the most debated aspects of the case, further complicating the question of whether justice was truly served. Can it ever truly be served? Now, and bear with me here, one of the most complex aspects of the Jen Shah case lies in how race and public perception influenced the broader conversation. It's important to address this directly. not to shift blame or distract from the crime, but to understand the dynamics at play in shaping public opinion. That's you and me, guys. How does the public get to the opinions they have? All right, first, let's consider the facts. Studies consistently show that on average, white households in the U.S. are wealthier or maybe more financially secure, if you will, than Black or minority households. This is discussed constantly. This is not meant to be a dig. These are facts. This wealth gap is rooted in systemic factors, but it still remains a statistical reality we can't ignore. Now, in the context of Jen Shah's telemarketing scheme, which targeted older individuals who could be defrauded out of significant sums, it is reasonable to conclude that many of her victims were white. And let's not forget, she was involved in hand-picking the victims that would be most beneficial to her. She would know who these people are. The scheme focused on elderly individuals perceived as having financial stability or some savings to exploit. And by default, in a country where white individuals statistically have greater wealth, they were more likely targeted. This isn't about racial intent, but it's about opportunity. And whereas people see Jen Shah as a victim of race herself, as she's a non-white, look at what she has done. We cannot not see it. And we cannot ignore Jen Shah's role in selecting these victims, hand-selecting these lists as part of the scheme to make it profitable for herself. This cannot be denied. But here's where public perception complicates the narrative. Discussions about Jen Shah's race, she's Polynesian, emerged in media coverage, with some arguing that her background influenced how she was treated in the legal system or viewed in the public. However, the reality is that her crimes targeted victims who were predominantly white, as they were statistically more likely to have the wealth to scam in the first place. And this fact flips the narrative often driven by public compassion for minority defendants. We're usually looking at this the other way, but it is important that we notice cases like this as well. It's never okay either way, but we can't ignore it on either side either. Public opinion may be swayed by media framing, often focused on the perpetrator's identity rather than the victim's. But in this case, the undeniable reality is that Jen Shah's actions exploited societal wealth disparities. She deliberately preyed on those perceived as most financially viable, regardless of their racial background. She didn't care who she was preying on. And this is a sobering reminder that compassion for perpetrators must be balanced against the actual facts of the case and the suffering of the victims, not what we are reading in internet articles and what the media is telling us. In fact, media these days is media. It's not news. If we look up the definition of news, it's to tell us what's going on, not tell us what we want to hear so we can stay glued to a television and create opinions that keep us divided and actually ignorant when we feel so smart. In the end, the racial dynamics here tell us less about Shah's motivations and more about how systemic realities and public perceptions collide. It's also important. The focus must remain on the crime itself and the lasting harm it caused to those who were deliberately chosen as victims. It matters every time. Jen Shah's case leaves us with questions that are as uncomfortable as they are critical. How do we reconcile a 6.5-year sentence with the reality that many of her victims, predominantly older white Americans, with the savings she targeted, will never recover? Never recover. Is public compassion being manipulated by media narratives, focusing on Shah's background and her charisma, rather than the devastation she caused? At the end of the day, this was not about race, privilege, or public perception. This is as simple as it gets, guys. This is about greed and deliberate exploitation. That's it. Shah did not just take money, she took futures. She took security from people and their future generations, and trust from people who could least afford to lose them. And so now I leave this to you. Was justice served? Or is this another example of the system failing those it's meant to protect? Think about the victims, the system, and the story, and decide for yourself. And thank you for being here with me in True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. Stay safe out there, stay curious, and